Hi, my name is John Treinfhir, and I'd like to talk to you today about ancient trader DNA. And specifically, I'd like to tell you a story of three trainer ancestors. My earliest known ancestor was named Thomas, and he leased land called Eshnagla near Slieve Bee in the northwest corner of Monaghan. His family moved over the course of the next couple of generations, first to Tadavnet, and then to Mullahanshigo, and then to New York City, where my grandfather, great-grandfather, father, and aunt are pictured here in this photograph in the 1920s. I'd like to talk to you for a moment about DNA, and DNA stands for Do Not Be Afraid. DNA is a blueprint for who we are. It's made up of 4 proteins, cytosine, guanine, adenine, and thymine, that combine in unique and different ways to tell our bodies and our brains how to develop. For our practical purposes today, there are 3 types of DNA in every cell. There's mitochondria that exists throughout our cells, acting kind of as little food processing factories to help us to metabolize energy. There's our autosome DNA, which is DNA that we inherit from all of our family ancestors. And then there's the Y and X chromosomes that help determine who we are in terms of gender. For today, we're going to focus just on Y DNA, which is a form of DNA that men inherit from their fathers going back into history. You can also do research on mitochondrial DNA, which we inherit from our mothers, and from autosomal DNA that we inherit from all of our ancestors. But for today, we're going to focus specifically on Y DNA that we inherit from our father's 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 father. Y DNA mutations happen at a moderately regular frequency, about 1 mutation every 100 years. It's not a mutation like X-Men or Superman. It's a mutation that just allows us to see the difference generation by generation. And by comparing Y DNA between people, we can identify whether we have some of the same mutations, how long ago our most recent common male ancestor lived. For example, if 2 men have 4 unique mutations when they compare to each other, their common ancestor probably lived around 360 to 400 years ago. And by the way, on this chart, which is a chart of what's called the Belbeeker people in L21, the trainers are mostly in this branch right here. Let's talk about our ancestors. Ancestor number 1 has a genetic code of L21, but I'm going to call him Liam for short. Liam lived probably around the year 2500 BCE. He was born somewhere in Western Europe, France, England, or possibly Germany. And over 60% of Irish men have an L21 marker, meaning they're descended from this guy, Liam. Liam was the high-tech guy of his day. He had a horse and a chariot, he had a bronze sword and knife, and he had advanced agricultural skills that the people who came before him, the Neolithic people, did not. Liam's ancestors migrated west in what's called the Indo European Migration. Their ancestors started out long ago in the Pontic steppes near the Caspian Sea around 16,000 BCE with a genetic marker called M343. But over the course of the next 14,000 years, they began to migrate. First, slowly, with markers like P25 showing up in Anatolia, markers like M269 and V88 showing up moving northward into Ukraine and southward into the Levant and Egypt. By the way, Tutankhamun had a genetic marker similar to ours. L23, around 3300 BCE in Greece. Then we see a split where the family, some move into Turkey across the Peloponnese, and some move up into Europe around the year 2500 BCE. Then it accelerates. Very quickly we see movement into France and Germany, and into Spain and Ireland by 2200 BCE. So if you notice, from the time that they moved into Eastern Europe to the time they came to Ireland was only around 300 years. Very, very fast migration, suggesting perhaps that they were moving into lands where they were more competitive, or where people had vacated property and abandoned land. I'll talk more about that later on. And as they moved, their language evolved too. So with this Indo European migration, you see them developing new languages that split off as they move, starting with Anatolian in Turkey, Greek, and those who moved east, Sanskrit and Hindu or Iranian. Those who moved west created the Greek language, the Latin language, the Celtic language, and the Germanic and English languages, depending on what stage of history, bearing in mind many of these were 1,000 years apart. Now, while Liam's ancestors were migrating across Europe, Neolithic hunter-gatherers lived in Ireland, and they created a lot of the stone monuments that we think of today, like Newgrange and some of the tunnel passages and the dolmens that we see in Ireland. These were all created before the year 2500 BC by the Neolithics who lived there. And whether by warfare or plague, the Neolithic Irish, and to a large extent the Neolithic Europeans, were declined. And they were replaced by the Celts by the year 2000 BCE. There's a lot of debate about why those Stone Age people disappeared. One of the most common theories right now is that they were killed off by a plague that spread through Europe around the same time. The bubonic plague, only a much earlier version than the Black Death that happened around 2500 or 2000 BC. Now, for the next 2,000 years after Liam, Ireland was peopled by these Celtic people who invaded around the year 2000 or 2500 BC. And Liam's descendants weren't flower children. When they weren't sowing or harvesting, they were happy to spend time raiding their neighbors for cattle, land, or slaves. There were about 120 chieftains throughout Ireland, each with about 700 odd warriors. One of these groups, known as the Dalriata, were called by the Romans the Scotti, and they invaded western Scotland, conquering the ancient Picts who lived there and creating the first group of people known as Scots. They were skilled metalworkers, and Irish gold from this period has been found as far away as Germany. So there was European trade among the Celts all the way from Ireland to Germany. Ancestor number 2 is a guy named Many More. His genetic marker is probably something like FGC 6545, and he lived around the year 350 AD. How do we know about Many More? Well, we think he was around 350 AD. He was born here in Ireland in Monaghan in the Old Kingdom of Oriel. He invaded the province of Connaught with his sons and his father, looking for new land, and he defeated the king of the Firbolg, whose name was Cian de Firbolg, around that time. He founded a kingdom in Connaught called the Hymeni, and he is the ancestor of the Hymeni Kelly and the Treinfhir. We're all genetically descended from Many More. The interesting thing is that this was in Connaught, where he founded the Hymeny, and yet, as a family, we're back up in Monaghan and Oriel. So what happened? Around the year 450 to 500 AD, our family tree splits into two trees, the Kellys and the Treinfhirs. Why did this happen? Why did the Kellys emerge and become a dominant family in Connaught, and the Treinfhirs became a dominant family in Monaghan? What happened around 450 AD? Why did our family branch into these two clusters? Why did our branch of the family return to Monaghan or Oriel? Why did it happen then? And why is our family branch called Treinfhir? Well, that leads us to ancestor number 3, whose name was Aedh Macartan, commonly known as Saint Macartan, who lived around 420 to 500 AD. Aedh Macartan was really named Fire, son of Rowan tree, if you translate it into English. Around 420 AD, a young man of good birth, possibly of the Hymeny, named Aedh Macartan, Fire, son of the Rowan tree, hearing of Patrick's teaching, traveled from his home to hear St. Patrick preach in Armagh, leaving behind his family. He first met Patrick at Drumlees, near Treinfhir, County Leitrim. Here, Macartan was baptized and soon became one of Patrick's official missionary staff. He was called Patrick's strong man, Treinfhir, or trainer. How did Macartan come back to Monaghan, to Oriel, from Connaught? Well, when Patrick was worn out by his work, that Macartan supported his faltering steps over rough roads, marshes, and rivers by carrying him on his back. Macartan was initially ordained while Patrick was still living by Patrick himself. On one occasion, after carrying Patrick over a river, an exhausted Macartan expressed a wish that he might be relieved from further travel and be allowed to settle down somewhere in a church close by his beloved master, who he could spend the evening of his life with in peace. Patrick, full of sympathy for his faithful companion and friend, agreed that he should establish a monastery in Clogher and finish out his life there. Incidentally, this was back in the year 500, when there was no prohibition against Catholic priests being married, and so we'll assume that Macartan brought his family up from Connaught to the monastery at Clogher. Why did he pick Macartan? Well, Patrick often chose chieftains' sons as acolytes. It made good sense. For Patrick to place a Hymeny chief's son at Clogher also makes sense. As a chieftain's son, he would have been more cultured and able to converse with other chieftains. As a descendant of the people of Oriel, or Monaghan, he would have spoken the dialect of Oriel. And as someone claiming descent from the lords of Oriel, he would have been able to approach his pagan parishioners as a cousin. Aren't there other Treinfhir families coming from other countries or other origins? Well, we're finding that the name is very unique. Not all Irish clans had a Treinfhir. Treinfhir is a kind of a unique word. It means strong man, but there are other Irish words, Gaelic words, like the word for hero or the word for champion. So it's not that every clan would have a hero or a champion. Treinfhir is a name that's pretty specific to our ancestry. And looking at Y-DNA testing, Treinfhirs don't test as English or Scottish. So far, all family tree Big Y tests have had Irish origins. Most of them are Hymeny Treinfhirs, and there is an exciting new development which shows an emerging branch of Treinfhirs coming out of the O'Neills, the the clan of the Neil of the Nine Hostages. But there's no evidence of trainers genetically originating outside of Ireland. So what does this tell us? It tells us that we're the descendants of this man Liam, L21, whose people migrated from the Caspian Sea and conquered Ireland around 2000 BC. We're the descendants of many more who defeated the king of the Firbolg of Connaught and founded the kingdom of the Hymeni. And I believe we're descended from Aedh Macartan, Saint Macartan, the first bishop of Clogher. But where do we go from here? Well, trainers whose families emigrated to Canada or USA or Australia have lost their Irish families. Many would like to know how to reconnect their ancestral ties, but they don't know how. Testing Y-DNA is great, but it only takes you so far if Irish trainers don't test. And Irish trainers have less incentive to test. They're more connected to their family and their land and their history, and so they have less interest in testing. So is there a way that we can work together? One possibility is by using family nicknames. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with nicknames, in Ireland, and particularly in Monaghan, there were so many trainers that we had to have family nicknames for us to be able to tell one James trainer or Patrick trainer or Seamus trainer from another one. And so the emergence of family nicknames like Becken and Miles and Paramore allowed us to begin to know what family someone belonged to. But because there are lots of trainers, there's also lots of trainer family nicknames. Emigrant trainers who want to learn more can conduct a big Y test to find out about their genetic ancestry, but they can also sponsor or co-sponsor a big Y test for an Irish trainer who knows his nickname and knows his family history. I'm suggesting that 2 Irish trainers from every nickname ultimately be sampled for DNA. The Irish trainer contributes knowledge of his family and his history, his townlands, his ancestry, and family legends. Emigrant trainers who left Ireland learn more about their family as a result. A big Y test isn't cheap. It costs about $650 in the United States, although it is reduced to about $500 several times a year. But together, if we work together, we can help each other to begin to reconnect our lost family. So where do we go from here? This is a map of trainer Y-DNA. I'm John over on the left-hand side. I may be from the same family nickname as Douglas Trainer. Are we both Mileses? We may be. I'm not sure. I don't know my Irish family for certain. But I've volunteered to sponsor a Miles trainer for testing, specifically Seamus Trainer of MS Pullyville. Noel and Ted are joining me as Trainer Genetic Fund managers. And as the tree expands, we're going to learn a lot more about our family. Thank you very much.